Okay, today in your plant packet, you need to be on the page that says Plant Anatomy and Growth. It talks about roots and shoots on the left-hand side and leaves on the right-hand side. Okay. Remember, we've been talking about plants and how if you have a seed in you, you're a fruit. And we talked about how a seed is made up of a protective covering, it has the baby plant in it, and it has a food source for it. If you are a root, a stem, or a leaf, like a carrot, lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, you are a vegetable. So the parts of a vegetable, or to be a vegetable, you're either a root, which we're going to talk about today, a leaf, which we're going to talk about today, or a stem. So we've got what we call the shoot system and the root system. Basically, the shoot system shoots out of the ground, so it's going to be the leaves and the stem, and then the root system is going to be below the ground. So by looking at this plant right here, notice it has a taproot, it has leaves with branched veins, and it has a flower in the multiple of a 5. So based on what we've talked about, you should know, is this a dicot or a monocot? Remember, dicots have parallel veins, they have a taproot as their central root with other little roots branching off, and they have leaves in the multiples of 5, or flower parts in multiples of 5. So looking at the root, what you're seeing here is a baby plant. Okay? That's a taproot there. It's got one long root coming off of it, and you can see all the little roots that are going to grow off of those. Those are called root hairs. They're going to help hold that baby plant in place like Velcro. And remember we talked about these things called cotyledons. And cotyledons were these seed, like these baby leaves. So as the root goes down and the baby plant starts to push its way through the soil, when it pops through the soil, it's going to have these little leaves to help it start photosynthesis so it can grow. So what you're seeing here, okay, you've got one little cotyledon there and the other little cotyledons back here. This part right here is the baby plant. So remember, cotyledons are these what we call seed leaves. These are these little leaves that the plant comes to the surface with so that they can start photosynthesis. So this is a dicot. It has 2 of those. Okay. Now in the case of roots, you guys know that they're going to anchor the plant in soil. So the roots help hold plants in place. So obviously the bigger the plant, the bigger the roots need to be because the plant's going to be heavier. Right? And so when you think of trees and things like that, most of your trees are going to have a taproot. They're going to have one really, really long root that kind of buries it, and then all these other little roots that are going to branch off. Okay. You also know that roots help transport water and minerals. Okay. We've been talking about xylem and phloem. Remember, xylem conducts water, and it's dead, so the cells can't use up the water. And phloem conducts sugar. So in the roots, you would have xylem going up the root into the plant, so water can go from the soil to the roots and then up the plant. And phloem is going to come down into the roots. Because remember, phloem carries sugar, and the sugar is made in the leaves. And it'll go down the stem and into the roots and helps feed the roots. And then also roots help store those materials. Okay? So carrots, beets, things like that you're eating are roots, okay? Potatoes. Right? So they're going to help, because during the wintertime, you can think of plants as hibernating. So in the spring and summer and fall, the plants need to gain as much weight as they can. You can think of it that way. So they need to make as much sugar as they can, and they'll put their sugars into their roots. And then they'll hibernate during the winter. They have no leaves, they can't do photosynthesis. So they're going to feed off of those food sources. And then once it starts warming up again, they'll grow their leaves back, and they'll do more photosynthesis. Okay. So in the case of the roots, you guys know this, anchor, transport, and store food. Which then takes us to the shoot system. The shoot system is basically your stems. And you can see there, one of the jobs of stems is to help store products of photosynthesis. What you're seeing here is what's called a white potato. White potatoes are not roots. They're actually stems that grow underground. When you were little, you might have taken a potato and put it in the windowsill in a glass of water and watched the roots grow from it. Well, that's because it was a stem, and it was growing the roots in order to get the nutrients. Okay, white potatoes are, and russet potatoes, what you call baking potatoes, those are actually stems that grow underground. Things like sweet potatoes Those are yams, things like that. Those are actually roots. This is an onion. An onion is actually a stem that grows underground. When you peel an onion, you're actually peeling the leaves of the onion, okay? But they're not green because they don't do photosynthesis. They're underground. But you can see here, there's the roots that come off the bottom of the stem, okay? But when you have an onion, you actually have a stem that grows underground, and each of these are leaves. So when you peel an onion, you're actually peeling leaves off of the stem. And you'll know the hard part, the middle part here is hard. That's the actual stem itself. Okay? So in the case of some stems, they can store products of photosynthesis. Now on your sheet, you'll see the word sink. Okay? Well, if you think about it, sugars are made in the leaves, and they will need to sink down the plant into the stem, and they'll need to sink down the plant into the roots. So that's what that term there is talking about. So speaking of things moving around, you have a term called translocation. And translocation is how plants move sugars inside of the phloem. Remember we talked about how the phloem are the tubes, like we have blood vessels, we have arteries and veins. Arteries take blood away from the heart, and veins bring blood back. So arteries go in one direction and veins go in the other. Well, you can think of xylem and phloem as the arteries and veins of a plant. They don't have blood, but they move nutrients just like your blood moves nutrients. So you can think, in the case of the phloem is going to move sugar from the leaves down the plant. And remember, xylem is going to move water from the roots up the plant. So just like your arteries and veins going opposite directions, the phloem and xylem go in opposite directions. And also, wherever you have an artery, you have a vein sitting right next to it. Okay? Arteries and veins run parallel with each other. The phloem and xylem are also going to run parallel with each other. So whenever it talks about this thing called, sorry, I'm moving it in. Whenever it talks about these things called bundles, a bundle is xylem and phloem side by side. Now remember, phloem cells are living. Because sugar is so big, the cells need to be alive to push it along. And the cells that actually help push it along, as you can just see here, are these things called companion cells and sieve tube members, right? But translocation is how the plant moves sugars down the plant. So the sugar's made in the leaves with photosynthesis, and it will move down the plant to the stems and the roots. Okay? The opposite of that's going to be transpiration. Now, transpiration looks like evaporation. Okay? And that's how it works. Transpiration is how plants move water up the plant through the xylem. And it does, obviously, translocation uses gravity. Okay? The sugar gets moved down. Well, with transpiration, you have to worry about gravity because you got to move this water up. And what the plant will actually do is it will use these guard cells that we've talked about. Okay? And guard cells open and close. And remember we talked about that's what the plant breathes through, and all the guard cells are on the bottom of the leaf. Well, what happens is at night when it's cooler, the guard cells will open up, and the plant will allow for just a little bit of water to be evaporated from its leaves. Well, as that water gets evaporated, it causes a suction, and that suction will then pull water up the plant from the roots. And that's this process called transpiration. And sometimes, depending on the temperature outside, the plant gets a really good suction going. And so you pull more water up the plant than water actually gets evaporated. And that's what dew is. Okay? Dew is formed from transpiration. Okay? The plant has opened the guard cells up to allow evaporation. And so evaporation started, so the plant started sucking water up through the roots. But then it cooled down and evaporation stopped. But it's like running a garden hose. It didn't turn off. So all this water keeps getting sucked up the plant and it just kind of sits on the leaf. And that's what dew is. But that's transpiration, and that's going to work opposite of translocation. Okay. Now we also got to talk about growth. You know that plants grow taller and you know that roots grow longer and deeper. Well, what you're seeing here is a stem, and what you're seeing here is a root. Okay. And at the end of the stem, right here, and at the end of the root, they have what's called a meristem. Okay. The job of the meristem is to go through mitosis. So this is where plants get longer. Okay. So what you're looking here is the root. Down here, this is called the root cap. This is all dead. This would be like your skin. Remember we talked about how your skin's dead? This would be like a callus on your skin or a thick area on your skin. These cells are dead because remember the root is digging down and you can't hurt dead cells. The meristem part is actually right here. Those cells will go through mitosis, and as they go through mitosis and make more cells, that's going to push the root down. Okay? Same thing is true here. This is a stem. These are leaves that protect the tip of the stem, and that's the meristem. And again, this is how the tree is going to grow taller. So if you have a tree and you keep cutting the ends of the stems off, it's going to stop growing because it has to have the end of the stem, it has to have this part here in order to grow. So meristems are where the plant's going to grow. Now there's two types of growth. Okay? In one case, the plant's going to grow taller / longer, and in the other case, the plant is going to grow thicker. Okay? So it talks about on your page, plant growth. Okay? The first one there is called primary plant growth. This is when the plants grow longer, taller, however you want to put it. And this happens at what's called the apical meristem. Apical means at the end. So this will happen at the end of the root, or this will happen at the end of the stem. And you'll see apical meristem on your sheet. Okay? So when the plant grows longer, taller, when the roots get longer, when the plant gets taller, you are doing what's called primary growth. And you guys, if you've ever noticed a root or a stem, when it first forms, it's really skinny, but then it gets thicker after that. Well, for the plant to get thicker, that's called secondary growth. And the secondary growth, oops, I spelled occurs wrong. Secondary growth occurs when plants increase in what's called girth. Okay? And girth basically means it gets thicker, it grows wider. And you guys have always known that you can count tree rings. Well, secondary growth is what causes tree rings to form. Okay? And so that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at a piece of a tree. Okay? Well, most trees only do secondary growth, or most plants in general, only do secondary growth about once a year. They'll grow taller and they'll grow longer, then they'll grow thicker. And it happens about once a year, and they're just adding layer upon layer upon layer. And actually, you can actually see those layers in rings. And I have some sections of trees that we're going to be looking at, but you can see how it's going to form different rings. And so you can count those rings and figure out how old the plant is. Well, you can also look at the rings and it tells you something about the weather that year. Okay? So what you see here, this is 1 year, this is another year, this is another year, and then here you've got a whole bunch of years. And this is the outside. Okay? Well, when you look at the tree rings of plants, okay, so here's a ring, here's a ring, here's a ring, and then you got a bunch of rings jammed into together. It lets you know how much rain there was. So these 3 years here, there was a lot of rain those 3 years because the cells were able to fill up with water. And so therefore you get these really big rings. Here, so there's a little ring, there's a little ring, there's a little ring. Here, there was not a lot of rain when this tree was growing, so the cells were not able to fill up with a lot of water. Right? And so with the tree rings, since they form about 1 ring a year, not only can you tell how old they are, it gives you an idea of how much rain it got during its growing season. Okay? Now, so that is the left-hand side of your note page. Okay? The right-hand side talks about leaves. So in the case of leaf structure, okay, we got different types of leaves right here. Okay. With your external leaf structure, all leaves attach with this little stalk. And this little stalk is what's called the petiole. So you can see down there, we got the petiole. That's what all these leaves attach to. And you can see here what's called a simple leaf. A simple leaf just means there's just one piece to the leaf. This is a compound leaf. This is still all one leaf, because it only has one attachment, it only has one petiole, but it's called a compound leaf because it's divided up into different parts. And the same thing is true there. Okay? But the petiole is the little itsy bitsy stem that connects the leaf to the main stem of the plant. Okay? And you guys know that leaves have a thin, flat shape. Okay? And it's basically like a solar panel. Okay? They're thin and flat to absorb as much sunlight as possible. But then you have things like pines with evergreens. Okay? Well, with a pine needle is actually a leaf that's rolled up. And it does that to kind of trick nature. Okay? Remember we talked about with photosynthesis how chlorophyll only works when it's like a long day and it's really sunny. Or excuse me, it's really warm. And in the fall, the days get shorter and it gets cooler. So the chlorophyll falls apart. And when the chlorophyll falls apart, the leaf dies because it can't do photosynthesis. Well, what pine trees do is their leaves are rolled up and the inside's hollow. So the inside of a pine needle is full of air. Well, that air heats up. And since it heats up, it tricks the plant into thinking it's still really warm outside because the leaf is warm. So that's why they don't lose their leaves when it starts getting cold outside, because the plant thinks it's still warm outside. Just a little fun fact for you. In the case of the inside of the leaf, well, this really isn't the inside, but the cuticle is the waxy, waterproof layer that plants have. Remember, plants can't just get up and drink whenever they want to, so they have to worry about losing water. So all plants have this thing called a cuticle on them. And you could actually take a leaf and kind of scrape your finger, and like this, what looks like candle wax comes off. And that's what's called the cuticle. It's there to help them from losing water. Underneath the cuticle is their skin. They have an epidermis, you have an epidermis. When you touch your skin, you're touching your epidermis. Your epidermis is all dead cells, while the epidermis of plants are also dead. You can't hurt something that's dead. So if something lands on you and tries to infect you or something scrapes you, the cells are dead, can't hurt you. Now, we have cuticles. We talk about the cuticles of our fingernails. For us, cuticles are just a lot of layers of dead cells. In a plant, a cuticle is going to be a waxy layer. And they use that cuticle to help decrease evaporation so they don't dry out and lose water. Then they have the stomatas. The stomatas are the openings in the leaf. It's like their nostrils. They will open and close. This is what they breathe through. Remember, plants breathe in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen. The stomata are only open usually at night or on cloudy, cool, overcast days. Because remember, when you breathe out, you also breathe out water. So if you put your hands to your mouth and breathe into them, you're also breathing out water. Well, if you get thirsty, you can go drink water. Plants can't. So plants have to worry about losing a lot of water. So they tend to only breathe at night or on cool, cloudy days. And what they breathe through are these things called stomata. Now, you can't really open and close your nostrils, but plants can open and close their stomata, and they do so using these things called guard cells. Guard cells, what happens at night when you have transpiration, the guard cells will swell. They'll fill up with water, and when they swell, they pull apart, and that creates an opening. So the plant can breathe. Well, during the day, or as it starts getting warmer and the sun comes out, the plant uses that water in photosynthesis, so the guard cells shrink. And when the guard cells shrink, they close, so it closes those openings. So they can really only breathe when the guard cells are open, and that's usually at night or on cool, rainy days. Now, the leaf itself has several layers, and in a minute you guys are going to be labeling and coloring the layers of the leaf. They have what's called the palisade mesophyll. These are column-shaped cells on the top of the leaf. So you have a picture in your packet of the leaf, and you'll see that here in a second. Sorry about that. Let's see, I think I have it too. Yep, right here. So this is a cross-section of the leaf. This is the cuticle and the epidermis, and then you have these cells that are tightly packed together on the top of the leaf. Those are the cells that we call the palisade mesophyll. These guys here, because they're going to be on the top of the leaf because that's where the sun hits. And this is where photosynthesis is going to occur. So they are jam-packed together so you can do as much photosynthesis as you want. On the bottom of the leaf, you're going to have what we call the spongy mesophyll. They are not as tightly packed together because plants only breathe at night. So during the day, they have to hold their breath. So they have to have spaces to hold the carbon dioxide and oxygen until they can breathe again. So on the top of the leaf, the really green part of the leaf, the cells are tightly packed together, and that's called the palisade mesophyll. Okay. The bottom side of the leaf, if you'll notice, it's not as dark because the cells aren't as tightly packed together. It's called the spongy mesophyll. Okay. And then you're also going to have veins. Now this says veins transports water into a leaf. When we talk about a vein of a plant is actually a bundle. A vein of a plant is a xylem and phloem running side by side. So you might want to jot that down on your packet. Okay? When we talk about a vein of a plant, it's a xylem and phloem running side by side. Okay? The xylem will bring water to the leaf, but remember, phloem is going to take sugar from the leaf. In you and I, veins take blood back to the heart. In a plant, a vein is actually a bundle. It would be like having one big garden hose with two smaller garden hoses inside of it. Okay? But one hose is the xylem. It's going to take water to the leaf, and the other hose is the phloem. It's going to take sugar out of the leaf. Okay? So what we have here, here's your palisade. These cells are tightly packed together. They're green. They're going to be doing the photosynthesis. Here's a vein. So inside the vein, you can see you have xylem and phloem together. And then down here, you can see there's more air spaces. That's your spongy mesophyll. Here are the openings that they breathe through, called the stomata, and the guard cells are going to be what open and close them. Right. And then we'll do plant reproduction later. And I can't get it to turn off.